Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Third Divide. My guest today is Jens Hieber. He is obviously a third culture kid, but he has also had the opportunity to teach in many different countries. So, Jens, why don't you take it away from here?
Thanks for having me, Mohammed. This is a great little experience. Um, as you already said, my name is Jens. I am a high school English teacher. I also taught middle school for a while in the UAE, which is where we met. Um, I'm This is a long story. I'm originally from Germany. That's where I was born. That's where my entire family lives. I know I don't sound very German, so that's part of it. I Most of my growing up years were spent in Kenya. My parents worked there. We moved there when I was about 9, so from 9 to 18, I lived in Kenya. Before that, we were in England for a number of years. So for about 3.5 years, that's where I first started school. So I used to sound like a little British kid. And then I went to university in Western New York. So my American accent kind of crystallized when I was there. And now I teach internationally, first in the UAE and now in Malaysia.
Wow, so those are so many places that you've gone to, more than most people actually in their childhood development years, right?
Mhm.
So at some points, it must have been a little tough to acclimate to your new environment. So how did you adapt? Were there any changes that you made along the way?
It's interesting because I think when I was younger, I didn't think about it very much. I mean, when we first moved to the UK, I was 4.5. So it's not, I don't know that I knew all that it entailed to move to a new country. And so a lot of it was just, oh, well, I guess this is what it is. Um, it's tricky when you don't speak the language right away. Luckily at 4.5, it's pretty easy to pick up. So it took, most of the first year. I wasn't in school yet. And so we were living with a variety of families. So I picked it up fairly quickly. And then the next year when I went to school, all the teachers would, call up my parents and be like, what's going on? I thought you all were German. He sounds like a little British kid. So like, I think the acclimation in that sense went fairly quickly. Um, I think in later years, I kind of got maybe into my head a little bit more, and I was thinking more about the transition process. But again, I was 9 when we moved to Kenya, and so part of it was just oh well, here's another move. I guess we'll do this. And I think it's more in retrospect that I recognize the process a little bit more.
hmm hmm So when you moved to Kenya at that point, must have been a lot different than when you moved to England. Did you actually start thinking about it at that point?
To some extent, yeah. I think my brother and I, he's 2 years younger than me, we had transitioned to an American system school. So before that, it was British system. I was in Germany in school for a year. That was a hoot. And then, so I think the school transition was probably the kind of the larger part where I first started thinking this is not the same as it's been before.
hmm
I mean, I'd already experienced that a little bit with kind of being in the German school for a year. This was in like second grade. But it was very, I had to consider, my schooling was kind of a little bit uneven with the moving to some extent. And so I had my reading and writing, they suddenly put me in fourth grade because in that sense I was ahead, but I was with my other classmates in third grade. My brother was in first grade at the time. He ended up repeating first grade for a year because he with the moves, he'd kind of been disoriented maybe academically.
Yeah.
And so kind of through that process, through the first few months there, I recognized my schooling in particular has not been following a consistent pattern.
hmm
So I recognized, okay, all the British people in the British school, they've got their pattern. And I had, my cousins in Germany, they've got their school pattern. And all the students that were at the American school in Kenya, they have had their pattern of education. And my brothers and I didn't fit with that. So that was probably kind of the first place where I recognized, oh, this isn't what everybody does. This is not something that's kind of normal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. To an extent, you kind of felt like you were a little different than everyone else, that like your classmates, your friends, right? So how did your all of those experiences change your worldview in that sense?
Mm. I think I recognized eventually, quick caveat, I am much more introspective now than I was then. So I've been usually a fairly kind of laid back, reserved sort of person. You could call me an introvert. A lot of my students sometimes don't believe me because as a teacher, I'm kind of far more outgoing than I would be in person
I believe that.
out of necessity, right?
Yeah,
So
totally true.
it's a necessary thing. Yep. And so a lot of, being kind of more introspective, I had to grow into that, thinking about something within kind of the larger context of where or when I was experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back, I realize now that my worldview, much like I think everybody's worldview, is very much colored by the immediate experiences we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, like as a TCK yourself, you recognize sometimes, especially your younger memories, those kind of hold a sort of weight. And for many, many years, especially as a young child, we just assume this is the world. The way that I experience it is the same way that everybody must be experiencing it, right? I'm sure you've got similar sort of experiences.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But as a TCK, do you feel like TCKs have a much more expansive worldview? Because like we
Some,
have to meet like
yeah.
people from all different backgrounds, and there was a lot of diversity growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think many TCKs do end up going in that direction, right? There's an ability within, I think, most TCKs to go, oh, here's my friend who I've been over at my friend's house. I've, eaten meals with them. I've done sleepovers, and they have a different religion. They have a different skin color. They speak a different language. And to kind of see that as normalized, there is then the possibility that a TCK steps out and says, oh, that's just as normal as my growing up experience. I have also met some TCKs that go the other direction, where they constantly keep comparing, where they're constantly saying, oh, that's different, that's not normal, that's not my experience. And they sort of like wall themselves off. I found that's more true sometimes with older children. I think younger kids are more likely to go, okay, that's fine. I'll just accept that along with everything else I've experienced. I think sometimes older TCKs can maybe be defensive and not want to see things from different perspectives. So I think that's maybe personality to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But do you ever find it a little harder to explain your life to someone else who didn't necessarily have the same experiences?
The story of my life, Mohammed.
Me too. Me too.
So you moved to Canada when you were how old? 14, 15?
It was in 2015. I think I was 14 or 13 at the time. It was at the start of grade 9. It was at the start of grade 9. So yeah. So like I moved there from the UAE, but I was actually born in Egypt, and I kept going to Egypt every year, sometimes multiple times a year. So I always felt like I had a connection to Egypt. It's not like I was just closed off from it completely. But yeah, I spent most of my childhood development years in the UAE though.
How old were you when you first moved to the UAE?
5 or 6.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm assuming most of your family was or is still in Egypt, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and like when we moved to Canada, we actually moved a few times between cities. So when we first came here, we lived in Vancouver, then we moved up to Prince George, which is like 900 kilometers up north, then moved to Victoria
Sounds cold.
in my grade 11. Yeah, it's like next to the Arctic Circle. And then we stayed there up until I was in grade 10. Then we moved to a city called Victoria when I was in grade 11. Then moved back up to Prince George when I was going into grade 12. So a lot of getting
Wow.
used to. Yeah, definitely.
Imagine. I imagine the changing schools that frequently was probably disorienting as well, right?
Yeah, that was the biggest changes I've ever had to go through in my life. They were the hardest changes, having to meet new people, make new friends, and just getting involved with the community a lot more. It was a little rough at the start, definitely, but especially when you don't stay there for a long time. We only stayed in Victoria for a year. Even though I
Yeah.
did get involved with the community, I didn't get a chance to fully dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah. My 10th grade year, we had moved back to Germany for a year.
Mhm.
So that was fairly common with the work my dad did. So we knew I was going to be in Germany for 1 year and then I was going to get back home to Kenya. Because at the time, Kenya was home. Like I had lived there for so long. That's kind of where I'd considered, that's where all my friends were. That's where I was familiar with the school system. So I was able to attend an American international school in Germany. So it was less disruptive in the sense that I was able to kind of follow this similar pattern of education. But I knew I was going to be there for a year. So in retrospect, I recognize I did not make good use of that year, partly
Mhm.
because I had told myself, oh, you're only going to be here for a year. So I didn't make a lot of connections. I didn't really connect super well with some of my teachers. I didn't make a lot of friends, and none of the friendships were particularly long going, if that makes sense. So in
Yeah.
my mind, I've kind of closed 10th grade off as, oh, that was that 1 year that, and I realize now it was my fault. Like I could have made more of that year. I was just looking forward to moving back home to Kenya, where all my friends were and I was familiar with the school and the system and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, I get you. That must have been rough. But that actually brings me to my next question. Is there any place between all the places that you've been to that you feel more at home or more like a foreigner in,
Hmm.
despite like feeling the need to feel more at home or feel more like a
Mm-hmm.
foreigner?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of, I don't think I have a permanent home. I don't think I ever will. It's, I think it's easy for people who don't move. So non-TCKs, people who live, I think particularly people who live in the same city or village or town. I mean, both of my grandfathers have lived in the same town their entire lives, and they're smallish towns. They've done traveling, they've, visited lots of different places in the world, but home was always that one town. For those of us who don't have that experience, I eventually, for the longest time, I thought Kenya is home. And it was. For the time that I lived there, I recognized the house that we lived in for probably about 8 of the years that we were there. That's, in many ways, I have a lot of roots there. Like that still feels like that was home at the time. We ended up going back and visiting a few years after we left. So we left Kenya in 2006, and we were able to visit sometime later. So I was, and the places changed, the places are similar, but I realized also it's not home anymore. And that doesn't mean it wasn't home back then, but like the home feeling had changed because there were different people living in the house. My friends that I used to go over to their houses, they're not living there anymore. So like it's not the same, and so kind of home moved, if that makes sense. And at the time, I had a different home, and so much of it I've recognized is home is kind of where you decide it is. It's, I think a lot of TCKs will say that home is, the people and or the family or the friends that you have, right? That's a very common I think for me, because I'm still moving, I mean, my wife and I have been in Malaysia for 6 years now. And so this is currently home. Like
Mhm.
we live in the north of Malaysia on an island called Penang. Gorgeous. I love it. This is great place to live, especially during a pandemic. It's not too bad. So this is currently home, right?
Yeah.
Someday we might move and, I'll find somewhere else that becomes home, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the case for every single TCK out there. They're either going to say that they don't really have a permanent home, or they're going to say they have multiple homes. Could be the place they were born in, could be the place they've spent their entire life in, could be just a place they've spent a couple of years in. But they're going to say they have
Yep.
multiple homes, and they're always going to have a connection to all these places at once.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but do you ever like realize the importance of living in the moment? Don't really look too much into the future and just focus on what's going on right now. Because if you
Mhm.
don't, uh, you're not going to be able to savor the experiences as much as you have.
Yes. So much yes. I think much of my early childhood
Mhm.
was lived kind of very much in the moment. My brother and I, our street in Kenya, we lived kind of all the way across town from school. And so a lot of my school friends lived closer to school. So I didn't get to see them much on the weekends or after school. And so my brother and I on our street, we had other friends that went to different schools. We had some close friends from Uganda that lived 2 doors down. They lived in the same street for a number of years. And then we had a number of Kenyan friends that also lived in the same street. And so we kind of became, we play, football on the street and marbles and whatnot, whatever else you can imagine. I played chess against this one guy. We were about the same level, and so we just play against each other all the time,
Yeah.
and we both got better. So that worked out fairly well. And so I think it kind of formed a sense of place
Mhm.
that kind of allowed me to be a part of that kind of immediate vicinity rather than just like the larger I live in Kenya, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So like your activities outside of school helped you with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of grounded me in a sense. I felt in the moment,
Mhm.
kind of when we were doing that. It was, get your homework, do it. Later on, especially after that year in Germany, I realized, oh, you know what? This is not permanent. I can't approach my life in a way that assumes that the things I'm experiencing now will always happen in the same way. So when we came back to Kenya my junior year, I realized I've got 2 years here. Like after I graduate, I'm done. I did not want it to end. It wasn't until my senior year that I remember consciously thinking, I need to be more intentional about this remaining year that I have here because I know it's not going to be the same afterwards. I assumed at the time I was going to be moving back to Germany. I had applied to a number of internships and so on. I knew my friends were leaving. Most of them were going off to university. Even if I had somehow figured out a way to stay in Kenya, it would not have been the same. And so that's kind of when I first started going, I need to live from day to day. And actually, it was revolutionary in the sense that my senior year felt longer than the others. And that was a good thing. Usually, I think we tend to joke, when something isn't great, it feels like it drags on forever, like a pandemic. And if you're having a great time, it feels like, time's just going by really quickly.
Yeah.
And so my senior year, I had that recognition of I need to treasure each of these moments. And I did. And so it felt kind of much richer in that sense. And I've tried to take that with me in the kind of subsequent years of, living in the moment, make friends in the moment, enjoy the time that I have with people because next year, I mean, even here teaching at an international school, I don't have the same students every year. I don't have students that are here from, kindergarten through 12th grade. There's one or two in each class. But a lot more, it's, oh, I
They
taught that
lost
student
them.
for 1 year and now they've left, right? And oh, we've got some new students. Same thing's true with staff, right? They keep, like, I have coworkers that are the same, and then I have coworkers that are new. And so a lot of it is, let me make sure I'm getting to know these people while I have the chance. And then I can say goodbye to them. Maybe I'll see them again. Maybe I won't. Kind of embracing the transitory nature of that sort of lifestyle means that I think this is the reason you were asking the question, is it makes those moments kind of richer and more meaningful as we live them.
I totally get what you mean. I actually did the same thing when in my senior year of high school a couple of years ago. I just tried to be more involved than ever before. I mean, I was on the grad exec board. I tried different sports, just to get to meet
Yep.
new people, right? Just more involved in the community. And when it comes to like, I mean, I got to savor all those moments. And when it comes to like back when I left the UAE, I don't think I did the same thing over there. I think I was just excited to leave and I didn't look back. But now that I think about it, I would like, I didn't want it to end, right? It was just a really rare experience for someone to have. And to an extent, I kind of wish I had stayed there. Not that I'm not thankful for the experiences that I have now, but I just wish I could have made more of my time in grade 8. That was my last year there. I wish I had made more of my time over there. And like I said, it's a rare experience. I mean, because of it, I got to travel the world more than most people will ever do,
Mhm.
right? And yeah, but like going into that, what are the main benefits you think you gained from being a TCK, and what are the main challenges that you faced too?
I'm gonna answer those in the other way.
Yeah.
In all honesty, I don't think there are that many challenges that I've faced. I think probably I have a hard time thinking of myself as German. That's probably the biggest challenge. So, I was born there. My passport is German. I try to visit probably about once a year, every year and a half, less frequently during a pandemic, of course. And I introduced myself as German. That's fairly common. And then I usually have to explain why my accent is not German. Well, as soon as I get to Germany, I love visiting. I love seeing, my family, my parents, grandparents, cousins. We get along really well, my brother and I. Whenever we were visiting growing up, it was always great fun to see everybody. I realize when I get to Germany, I am not very German. I am just not as German as the Germans who live in Germany. And so it makes it hard to kind of think of myself as German, because I don't kind of fit into kind of some of the same paradigms. So I've done a number of things to kind of intentionally try and maintain kind of more connections to Germany. So I try to listen to the German news every day. I speak and listen. I speak German. I can read it. I try to read 1 or 2 books in German every year just to kind of stay with that. But at the end of the day, other than when, Germany's playing in the Euro or the World Cup, I don't feel that German. Like, I don't feel like my connection is that strong. So I think that's been one of the kind of connected to the whole home, location, belonging. I feel like I should belong there, and I really don't. I think I'd have a very hard time moving back to Germany. It's probably one of the few places on this planet that I don't want to live. So I'm sure I'll live in Germany at some point, but I don't feel the desire to move there, even though I really enjoy visiting. I really enjoy, being with my family. I love German food. It's all good stuff. But I feel like I would be out of place if I had to live there. Maybe more so because people would expect me to belong. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And it's more of a mental challenge that I have to kind of play with myself in that sense, where I have to convince myself this is your country. And, you are, I try to vote. I try to, be engaged as much as I can. So that's the challenge. Benefits, countless, numerous, whatever number you want to use, I love not being tied to one place. I love being able to, not necessarily even being forced to look at things from different perspectives. I love, that, I think they call it cognitive dissonance, when you experience something and it just feels jarring and you can't understand why. And I try to like mentally go through, why was that experience so disconcerting or disorienting, and figuring out, oh, it's because they hold this value system and I had this expectation, and here's why that didn't work. And then mentally playing the game of, okay, let me put myself in that person's shoes and see if I can understand why they made that choice, or why they said that, or why do they hold this belief or follow this pattern. That has, I think, allowed me to get out of my own head. As introverts, I get stuck in my own head. I have that, most introverts sometimes will, play things out to the furthest extremes in their own heads and forget actually reality is completely different from this thing we've imagined. And so I think the experience of being able to see something from a different perspective, and not just one different perspective, but lots of different perspectives that are all to some extent valid, that recognition, I think more than anything else, has been life-changing, honestly.
No, I totally get what you mean. And what you mentioned, being not feeling that you're German enough, I think that's the main problem, the concept of home. That's the main problem that many TCKs go through, because most of them have lived in other countries besides their country of birth or their country of their passport most of their lives. So I'm just going to bring in my own experiences into this. So I actually went back to Egypt a couple of years ago, right?
Mhm.
And that was actually my first time going there in 4 years, right?
Okay.
And I was actually really excited. I've always thought of myself as Egyptian. I felt like great pride in that, right? But this time, when I went there, it was really different than all the other times that I've been there, right?
Mhm.
Because all the other times I've went there every year, multiple times a year. This time it was different. Everybody kept saying about how I had a different accent whenever I spoke Arabic or something.
Yeah.
This is actually kind of funny. When I was going to my wrestling practice over there, and the security guard, I was asking him if I can go inside, and he said, "Hey, you sound a little different. Like your accent feels a little unfamiliar. Like, where exactly are you from?" And at that point, I kind of got fed up with answering it. So I just told him, "Hey, listen up, buddy. I'm actually from Mars." So, and he was like, "Well, he's trying to be funny, so he's got to be Egyptian." So he just let me in. It was a different experience, but glad I got to partake in it. Yeah. My
Yeah.
sorry.
I was going to ask, so going back to Egypt, I think you would still consider yourself Egyptian. I think you would still
Right.
consider, Egypt as having been home, or, I sometimes like to think of places as future homes. Like, oh yeah, I could be at home there. Sometimes like I'll see a place in a movie, or I'll like travel and visit someplace and go, this could become a home. Um, do you think you'd ever consider moving back to Egypt? And if so, what are probably the biggest challenges that you think you'd face?
Well, I mean, I would definitely see myself living in Egypt if I had to. I feel the biggest challenges that I would have to face is definitely just my accent. I got to get better at it. If I speak to someone who isn't Egyptian, who does speak Arabic, they would know that I'm Egyptian, but to another Egyptian, it would sound a little different. That would be my main concern, right? I think I would just feel at home there, just because I feel home is more for people than anything else. I still have my family over there. That's why
Mhm.
I would say moving back there would be an option, because all my family lives there, right? Right. I would have like so many family outings. It would just make things so much easier. And I think I would have a great time.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
yeah, my
Yeah, on the language thing, I my parents speak fluent English, so they do have a bit of an accent. My dad's accent gets more pronounced when he's on the phone. It's kind of funny. And so I speak a lot of English with my parents, partly because my wife doesn't speak a lot of German. So when we're around, as a family, we end up speaking English, and then throw in a few German words here and there. But something like visiting my grandparents, I can't use English. I have to use German because they don't speak any English. My grandma has the phrase "Happy Birthday." That's about as much as she can say. And so, suddenly I have to, switch. I have to find like a version of German that I haven't had to use on a regular basis. And it's a funny story. My brain kind of switches over. I have a really hard time kind of quick switching between languages.
oh
And
yeah.
so we were visiting one time, and I was doing so much speaking in German where, with my grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and my wife was there. So I was doing some translating for her. And I have a lot of cousins and some aunts and uncles who have some English. And so she was able to talk with them in English as well. So for about 2-3 days, I was doing almost nothing but talking German.
Wow.
And then we were kind of driving back home, and I was navigating, and so I was giving my wife directions. And for some reason, the English words weren't there. It was all German. Suddenly, it's like my brain had decided to kind of switch over to its German half, but it takes a while for that German to come back. I had a German student here a number of years ago, and she spoke German, but mostly she spoke English when she was at school. But then her mom loved talking German. So anytime her mom was on campus and would see me, she'd just start rattling off in German. And it would always take me a second of, okay, wait, different language, got to recalibrate and find that. And the words sometimes are missing. Like they just don't show up. You're like, I know the English word for this, it's right there, but the German one, I used to know it somewhere. A different me used to be familiar with that, but not at the moment. So I get the language thing.
Yeah, definitely. Anyway, my last question for you today is so not only are you a TCK, but you also teach many TCKs. Would you say most kids in your class are TCKs?
Yeah, of one form or another.
Yeah. So what kind of parallels can you draw from your experiences to their experiences? How is it different teaching them as a TCK yourself?
I think it makes me more aware of kind of the different paradigms that the students are having to jump through.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think TCK there's a variety of forms. So
Yeah.
I think, even a student who has lived in Malaysia their entire life and then suddenly switches from, say, a local school to an international American school, that's a different culture,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So, they come to school every day engaged in, the school I teach at is called Dalat. They come to the Dalat community, this, very Western education, American curriculum. It's a different culture. And they might go home and not have anybody who speaks English at home. So they're switching between two cultures, even though they've lived in the same country their entire life. So, there's that experience. And then we've got, our students from North America, our students from, say, South Africa. We've got a lot of Korean students who kind of fall into the more traditional understandings of TCK. And it helps that I have had those experiences. We, growing up in Kenya, we mostly spoke German at home because I think my parents recognized it was important that my brother and I speak those languages. And it's very easy to lose that. There's plenty of families that are like, no, we live in this country now. We're going to switch over entirely. We're going to try to assimilate into this new culture. And I think for some people, maybe that's okay. I also recognize the value of saying, yes, let's accept the things that we value and appreciate about this new culture, but also let's hold on to our experiences and our heritage and our language and traditions and kind of make that sort of a fusion rather than saying it has to be either or. And so I try to make sure that students in my classroom feel that their experiences, their previous schooling, their kind of understanding of the world, their families, traditions, cultures, those are valued as well. And just because we do things one way in this classroom doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. So I think it's given me maybe a sort of empathy for them. I sometimes have students that are very concerned about spelling things the British way because
Oh,
they were in a British school system, or like all of their English was, all of it was OUR, and the way that they use commas is slightly different. And so their concern is like, does it matter? Do I have to spell the American? I was like, no, go ahead. Like, as long as it's grammatically correct, it's fine by me, because there's more than one way to do it. And so I think it's allowed me to have that level of, it doesn't have to be my way or the highway. We can have multiple different ways of approaching something. And it actually makes for a richer classroom. It allows us to, approach a text. Say, one of my classes, we read a text by a Japanese author. And it's interesting because he's Catholic Japanese. And so it's very interesting to see that story, which is also set in the 1400s. So we're getting, some years I have some Japanese students, and I have, a lot of students from other parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. And so hearing, the different interpretations of some of the scenes in the story between students who are Christian or non-Christian, based on the fact that he's a Catholic author, students who are Japanese or non-Japanese, Asian, non-Asian, looking at kind of those paradigms as we interpret that text differently based on our background, our experiences, our language, our culture. And that's a good thing, right? That's where the richness of the text comes out, when we recognize, oh, there's not just the one right answer here. This is not just one way of looking at this text. We're actually all better off when we look at each other's interpretations, and it makes us less sure about our own interpretation, which I think is good. It gives us a sense of, yes, I can have this interpretation, and that other person can have that interpretation. And maybe parts of it are right, parts of it are wrong, and we can bounce those ideas off. And in that dialogue, that's where a lot of the value of kind of finding meaning comes from. And I think as a TCK, I have learned to value that, and I can kind of hopefully transmit that a little bit to my students through the vehicle of literature. And you asked me about being a teacher, so I was always going to talk about literature at some point.
Mr. Jans, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your input. This was absolutely incredible.
Thanks for having me.